Hello, everyone, and welcome to Roots Tech Connect 2021. I'm Henry Louis Gates Jr. You might recognize me as the host of Finding Your Roots on PBS. I'm also a fellow genealogist and historian, and that's partly why I've found this past year so intriguing. A lot has changed since last year's Roots Tech, some for the better and some for the worse. And while this past year has certainly proven to be a challenging year for so many of us, a quick look back at the lives and times of our ancestors reveals something interesting. There have always been hardships to overcome. There have always been challenges to work through. Some were even bigger than what we're dealing with today. And our ancestors found a way. They banded together. They found strength in themselves and in their family. They persevered. Through their determination, their families survived. Our families survived. If their stories tell us anything, it's that the more we work together, the more we share the hard-earned knowledge of the past, the better equipped we are to process all that's happening and find the strength to face it with wisdom and bravery, just like our ancestors before us. Finding Your Roots has granted me the great privilege of sharing these stories of resilience and triumph with the many guests who've appeared on the show. Being able to introduce these people to their ancestors and the struggles they faced is a great reminder to me about how important it is to pass these stories along. I know it's a little harder these days since we can't just go over to someone's house and pull up a chair. But while we may be apart physically, it's important to stay connected with each other. And I can't think of a better way to connect with family than by sharing the stories of the ancestors who made us possible. One of those stories that ties family together is the story of where we're from. Genealogy has always been a powerful way to dig back into the past and see the journeys that our ancestors made. How did they get where they are? Where did they come from? What were the circumstances that led to their movements? The answers to these questions come easier for some than for others. Even I thought I had the answers. Obviously, my ancestors are from Africa, but by exploring my family history and taking a DNA test, it turns out that what I thought was wrong. I'm not as African as I thought. It turns out that I'm 50% European and 50% sub-Saharan African. My mitochondrial DNA points to Europe, and my Y DNA points to Europe. That means that on my father's father's line, I'm descended from a white man. And on my mother's mother's line, I'm descended from a white woman. Parts of my heritage were revealed to me through DNA that I had absolutely no idea about. This set me on a journey to discover the places in my family's history. It's amazing how all these new tools can make such a profound difference in how you view yourself and how you relate to others. This past season on Finding Your Roots, I sat down with Sterling K. Brown. We had a fabulous conversation about identity and what it means to know who and where you're from. But as an African American, finding that direct connection to Africa can be nearly impossible. But unlike most African American stories, we had a surprise for Sterling.
Wow. Oh my goodness. My family's going to flip.
We almost never see a native-born African identified in the family trees of Black Americans, and there's a very good reason for that. The slave trade from Africa to the United States ended in 1808. So by the time all African Americans were identified by name for the very first time in the 1870 federal census, their African-born ancestors had long been deceased. As a result, many African Americans believe that we can never find a paper trail back to Africa. But there are exceptions. Our journey began with the 1900 census for Liberty, Mississippi, where we found Sterling's great-great-grandparents. Frank and Sally Banks. This is a line of Sterling's ancestry that he thought he knew well. According to family lore, Frank and Sally were exceptionally accomplished, and the census bore this out.
Can you tell me what the transcription says about their home?
Owned or rented?
Yes.
Owned.
Owned.
They owned it.
That's right. Your great-great-grandparents, Frank and Sally, owned their own farm. And that was no small feat.
No.
In 1900, less than 20% of all black farmers in Mississippi owned the land that they worked on.
Less than 20%?
Less than 20%. And this is 35 years out of slavery.
Right.
Because slavery ends in 1865 and it's 1900.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Banks.
Are you surprised to see that?
This is in keeping with lore. This is in keeping with lore. And it's nice to know that, like, okay, they didn't inflate this part.
While we were certainly glad to confirm Sterling's family stories, that wasn't our main purpose here. The reason we'd focused on the Banks family was that this census record contained a very important detail.
Please read who else lives in Frank and Sally's household.
Melinda Allen, grandmother, widow, born April 1818 in Mississippi.
This document doesn't specify whose grandmother Melinda is.
Right.
But most of the records we gathered suggest that she was the grandmother of Sally. And what that means is that you just met your fourth great-grandmother. Melinda Allen is your great-great-great-great-grandmother.
Wow.
And according to the census, she was born about 1818, likely in slavery in Mississippi.
Right. Wow. Oh my goodness. That's awesome. My family's going to flip. I don't know if anybody knows Melinda Allen.
Yeah.
A name I've never heard. Oh, wow.
Following Melinda's paper trail, we came to the 1880 census, where we found her living with her husband, Jesse Allen, in Ahmet County, Mississippi. Jesse, almost certainly, is Sterling's fourth great-grandfather.
I'll be damned.
And according to this census, Jesse was born about the year 1815, also in Mississippi. But there's something else about Jesse that I want to show you, something that's really surprised me. Would you please turn the page?
Okay.
Now, Sterling, would you please read where Jesse's parents were born?
Birthplace of father, Africa. Birthplace of mother, Africa.
Combing through that magical 1870 census, we found Sterling K. Brown's fourth great-grandfather, a man named Jesse Allen. And we discovered that his parents, Sterling's fifth great-grandparents, had actually been born in Africa. That single magical word, Africa, brought Sterling K. Brown to tears.
Wow, man. Wow.
And his emotion points to something much deeper, the power of genealogy to help rebuild families that had been shattered by slavery, a power that can be startling to behold.
When you hear like your friends talk about their German ancestors and their Irish ancestors and Italian ancestors, like I feel like I'm on the cusp of like, I can join in that conversation.
Yes.
Right? This is awesome.
The records we found were able to bring Sterling a direct connection to Africa, a powerful discovery. Knowing where your family comes from is such a meaningful anchor to a family story. And when that DNA test can be reinforced with records and dates and names, it makes that place feel so much more real. It's not just the places that feel real. There's a special kind of magic that happens when you make a connection to an actual ancestor you never knew before. That magic will transport you through time back to their world. You can get an actual glimpse into the life they lived, into the decisions they made and the effects of those decisions down through time. For me, that magic happened with the discovery of my fourth great-grandfather, John Redmond. During the American Revolution, John Redmond was mustered in on Christmas Day, 1778. Can you just imagine what that would have been like, taking part in this country's fight for its independence? When I was studying the American Revolution in school, I had no idea there were even Black people in the American Revolution, let alone one directly connected to me. And on top of that, he lived just 30 miles away from where I was born. John Redmond fought to help create this country. He played a role in American history. This is a gift that he has passed down to me and to my brother and to our children and our grandchildren. And today, we're proud members of the sons and daughters of the American Revolution because of the discovery of our fourth great-grandfather, John Redmond. One of the highlights for me in Finding Your Roots is that moment when we introduce our guests to one of their ancestors and they get to see the importance of that person's life. They get to see their name and hear their story and spend a moment in their shoes. This past season, Queen Latifah came on the show and had just that moment.
Oh my God. Tingling right now.
Many African Americans assume that we'll never be able to learn anything about our ancestors who were enslaved. And for a long time, sadly, this was true. But because of recent exciting advances in technology and digitization, this is no longer the case. What's more, we have to remember that not all of our ancestors were enslaved. Though every African who was brought to America was brought as a slave, roughly 10% of our ancestors were freed by the start of the Civil War. So if you're descended from one of them, tracing your family history will be far easier than you ever imagined, since free people of all colors were listed by name in the federal census and on a wide variety of other public and legal documents. We discovered that Henry came from Virginia, where his ancestors were likely enslaved. But because enslaved people weren't listed by name in census records, Henry's roots vanished from the paper trail before the Civil War, as do the roots of almost all African Americans. This poses an immense challenge to genealogists and is a byproduct of the very design of the institution of slavery, which sought systematically to obliterate the humanity of Black people, stripping them of their names and their family ties, a fact that can be painful to contemplate. For a moment, I feared that slavery had thwarted our research, that we couldn't take Latifah's father's roots back any further. But while following her direct paternal line, we noticed something in the 1860 census for Virginia, the last census taken during the slave era.
Frank Owens, age 40, sex male. Lovey Owens, age 30, female.
Now, you just met your third great-grandparents, your great-great-great-grandparents. And Latifah, in 1860, they are listed by name in the census. So what does that mean?
That means they weren't slaves?
That means you descend from free Negroes. You descend from free people of color.
Thank you, Lord.
Realizing that so many of her relatives had been spared the horrors of slavery was profoundly moving to her. It also allowed us to trace her Black ancestry back into the 1700s, something we can almost never do, and to reveal in the end the rarest of all finds in African American genealogy, the document that freed her first ancestor.
Being conscientious of the injustice and impropriety of holding my fellow creature in state of slavery, I do hereby emancipate and set free. No way. No way. One Negro woman named Jug, who is about 28 years old, to be immediate free after this day, October 1st, 1792. Mary Old.
You're looking at the moment that your family became free.
I mean, what must that have been like to get this, to know this, to know that you are free?
You know, on September 30th, 1792, she was a slave.
Yep,
The next day,
she was
she was free.
It's all at once ridiculous and just so important. People still think that one person can't make a difference. One person made a difference
Oh, big time.
to my whole entire family line. Mary Old, one person made a difference to my entire family line. That's crazy.
She's right. One person can make a difference. We were lucky to have found those documents, but they are out there. And more of them are getting scanned and becoming searchable every day. Each of those documents has the power to affect people's lives. Each of those documents tells a story about the people that came before us and the life-altering decisions they made. People and stories that would otherwise have been lost to us. So keep looking for those ancestors. Once you find those ancestors, remember to share them with your family. It sounds obvious to say, but the more people in your family who know the story, the more your efforts can help everyone take stock of what you mean to each other. What makes genealogy so powerful is the bonds that it builds, not just to the past, but to the relatives that you have around you today. I spend a lot of time telling other people about their families. But this year, I'll be the one sitting on the other side of the table, learning about one specific ancestor. And I'm bringing my whole family along to share the experience with me. I almost have to, since they're banging down my door, to find out who this guy really was. As I mentioned earlier, through DNA, I found out that I have Irish ancestry. And we've always known that my great-great-grandfather on my Gates side was a white man. He fathered several children with my great-great-grandmother, Jane Gates. And for my entire life, there's been a lot of speculation in my family about who this guy was. Now, through the work of a genetic genealogist, they were able to find out this guy's name. But they're not telling me anything until we shoot the episode. My family doesn't sit around emailing about genealogy, believe me. But with a long-awaited reveal like this, my inbox has been blowing up. I'm lucky, very lucky, that I get to bring them to the taping, and we're going to make a family reunion out of it. That moment will be something that we can share for generations. But not everyone has their family readily available to share stories with. Some of our guests have been on a lifelong search for their family members, and they come to Finding Your Roots hoping to shed some light on their past. One such guest was Taya Leone. Taya's mother, Emily Patterson, was adopted and never knew the name of her biological parents. Fortunately, we were able to use her DNA results and compare them to the results of 6 million people. And what came back was a revelation. Taya Leone grew up with an entire branch of her family tree shrouded in mystery. How did you find out your mother was adopted?
I was about 7 or 8. And I was down in Amarillo, and we were with my cousins, and it's one of those things that flew out of somebody's mouth like everybody knew it.
And what was its effect on you?
I was scared. I had a sudden feeling. I remember feeling like untethered all of a sudden, like literally like my knees were gonna go. Because I guess it the only first thing I could think of was, then who are grandmom and granddad?
For young Taya, grandmom and granddad were Virgil and Florence Patterson, a Texas couple who adopted her mother Emily when she was an infant. They were the only parents Emily ever knew. They adored their daughter, and she adored them. Taya did as well. But learning that they were not her biological grandparents unsettled Taya. And she told me that it took her some time even to raise the subject again. Taya and her mother were facing the challenge that many families affected by adoption must face, and each handles it in their own way. The bonds between parent and child can be equally deep, whether the relationship is biological or adoptive. Nevertheless, the desire to know one's roots is profound. And over time, Taya grew increasingly curious about who gave birth to her mother, Emily. Indeed, it's the main reason she wanted to be in our series.
She's on board. She did not want to be here today. I think she told me, you go find out what you're going to find out, and then you come tell me.
With Emily's blessing, we began to try to unravel this mystery. There was absolutely no guarantee that we'd succeed. Countless adoptees have spent their entire adult lives without ever discovering the identities of their birth parents. Fortunately, we had an ally, genetic genealogist Cece Moore. Cece specializes in what's known as biological family reunification. She's a detective with skills that would put Sherlock Holmes to shame. If anybody could find Emily's birth parents, it was Cece. With no records to guide her, Cece began a painstaking process. She compared Emily's DNA to the DNA of people in multiple databases, hoping to find a close relationship. She started by looking at the family trees of all the people who share significant amounts of DNA with Emily, trying to find common ancestors. Cece built dozens of family trees, looking for connections between the descendants of these 4 ancestral couples. Her search finally narrowed down to 2 sisters from Louisiana, named Irene and Abilene Gindrat. And we believe that one of them is your mother's mother.
Wow.
So then we have to find out which one it is. And to figure that out, we needed to do more DNA testing. Irene never had any children that we know of, but Abilene did. And thankfully, Abilene's daughter agreed to test for us. So on the next page, I'm going to show you a chart that compares your mother's DNA to our tester's DNA. Any segments that they share will be highlighted in red.
Okay.
You ready to find out?
Yeah.
Would you please turn the page? You see a lot of red or you see little red?
I see a lot of red. Shared DNA, 26%.
And I said that if they shared 25%, then they shared a mother.
Right.
Your biological grandmother is a woman named Abilene Gindrat. This resolves a question that you were asking
43 years ago.
43 years ago. I want to show you something. Will you turn the page?
Yeah. Who's that?
That's your grandmother.
God. She looks like my mom a lot. Boy, that is... I mean, even just the way she holds her head.
Really?
Yeah.
We want to know a little bit about her?
Yeah.
Okay. Abilene was born on May 13th, 1920, likely in a place called Zwolle, Louisiana. She grew up on a farm, and she got married in the 1950s and had 2 daughters,
Oh my gosh. Wow. Boy, that is something. I was ready to have that question answered.
Oh, I believe you were.
She looks like she has a good heart. I mean, my mom does, and she looks like my mom.
We were able to give Taya's family answers to a question that had plagued her mother for decades. A longtime family mystery at last was resolved. The identity and life details of her biological grandmother, Abilene, were found. These kinds of discoveries can have a profound effect on a family. And on top of that, Abilene was still alive at the age of 96. A private meeting was arranged, and 4 generations were brought together to meet each other for the first time. Abilene, Emily, Taya, and Taya's daughter. While not all family history discoveries may be as profound as the one we found for Taya and her family, they each hold their own special significance to every one of us. That's why I encourage you to share what you find with your family. Pass these stories along and bring all your relatives along for the journey. Doing research into one's family history can close the gaps of time and distance. It can introduce us to places and culture that we never knew we were connected to, and open our eyes to people of the world. It can help us imagine the hardships and the triumphs of the ancestors who came before us, and teach us how to look for their strength within us. It can also bring us all closer to the people right next to us with whom we share our blood, our strengths, and our dreams. During times that pull us apart and divide us, our family history is always there to remind us that we're more alike than different, more connected than separated, and more resilient than we ever imagined.